Okay, so it's 11:45. I think we can start the event. I'm Paolo Ciuccarelli. I'm the founding director of the Center for Design at Northeastern University, and welcome everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the second lecture of the Center for Design series. In the first one, back in January, we had Giorgia Lupi talking about data humanism and how design can help building more meaningful and effective relationship and experiences with data. And today I'm very, I'm honored to have with us Ezio Manzini. Ezio, was actually that lecture was scheduled for March the 11th, but we, were right in the middle of the disruption with the COVID virus. And so actually Ezio almost made it because he was in New York City when we had to cancel the event. And so, yeah, it was a little complex, a kind of a troubled lecture that, but I'm really happy to have him here now, even if it's just a virtual lecture, but I'm sure that, actually, we managed in a way to transform that into a kind of opportunity, because what we did and what we agreed with that is to transform the discussion that was mainly centered on, based on his last book, Politics of the Everyday, on the role of design and what design can do, not just now, in the contingency of the emergency, but mainly, most importantly, I would say afterward, when, we are supposed to come back to something like a normal condition. That maybe that's not maybe the right way to phrase it, but that's why I decided to change also the title of the lecture and to and that's the proposal that Ezio came with, and that we approved. So Discontinuity, Politics of the Everyday in the Post-Pandemic Phase, that's the title of what we call an open conversation. So it means, as it will go through a 20 minutes, something like that, presentation, and just to propose some hypotheses of work around the role of design. And then it's pretty much the discussion that comes afterward that I think will build the value of this opportunity. So I'm really happy to leave the stage and the floor, this virtual stage, to Ezio, and let him go on with his talk. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will, after his talk, open the question and answer session. You can use the chat to do that. I mean, if you have questions, you can use the chat of Zoom as a tool to address the questions. And Angelica from our College of Media and Design will keep track of all the questions, and so we make sure that we will address them at the end. We have more or less an hour, but we are open to continue the conversation if people get engaged. And I think there is a lot that we can discuss, and hopefully to build together an hypothesis for what the future will look like through design. Ezio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And do you see me?
Yeah.
Because I still see only the title, but
yeah,
okay.
Start sharing your screen and the title will disappear.
Okay. Sorry, I arrive immediately. So here I am. Thank you for this invitation. I have to say that I really would have preferred to be with you. Not only because it meant that we did not have this kind of a pandemic tragedy, but also because I could have the opportunity, well, to meet Paolo, that I know very well. So I was very interested to see in his new ecological environment. And but also to see all the other teachers and the students that I can only imagine now. So it's a little bit funny to talk with so many people that I imagine that are there, but I don't see. And but I will do my best to give the sense of what I want to do and what I want to discuss with you. As Paolo said, this is more at the moment a kind of a reflection, and I will very shortly give you some titles of topics that could or should be discussed by us and afterward in the process of going on with our work. And of course, the starting point cannot avoid to be about this tragedy. And this tragedy, everybody says, it's a medical tragedy that is going to bring also a social and economical high difficulties, if not tragedy. And this is the condition we still are, both in Italy and in the US. At the same time, for what is interesting for us is that something very, very special happened. We could say very interesting if it was not based on the tragedy. That is the fact that we have, at a certain point, had maybe 1 billion people in the world, very diverse, in very different places, with very different environments, with very different culture, with different also way in which they are pushed to do what they are doing, but doing the same thing. So in some way being locked down inside their own home. And this can be seen a kind of incredible, big, large, deep social experiment, something that have never been before at this scale. So all of us are frightened by a certain point of view, but also very curious to see what can happen. So what will be the footprint that this kind of incredibly big and large event will leave in the life of the individual and in the social life of all the different societies. And of course, given that in some way this phase of urgency is going to move on and pass, everybody is talking and thinking what will be the next stage, what will happen. So what will be the post-pandemic phase, and what is the transition to arrive what? And effectively, if we talk about this transition, and we cannot avoid to talk about the transition in this moment, so we have to prepare ourselves, not only how to manage the present urgency, but also what will happen afterwards. If it is a transition, it means that we are going to move from somewhere to somewhere else, from some way of being, a way of working, a way of living, a way of organizing our society to another one. And every transition has to be done leveraging on something, so where we start from. And also, this is also very important, where to go, because as everybody knows, so for many people, the where to go seems to be simple. We have to go back to the normality, but also more and more people think that, first of all, we will never go back to the normality, because something like this will not, will change the reality. And so in some way, we will never find the normality as it was before. And at the same time, many people, in between myself and maybe many of you, recognize that in what has been considered the normality before is largely the cause of this tragedy. And for sure, it is a cause of other kind of big challenge that we have. First of all, the environmental one. And the fact that now we don't talk so much about it, it do not mean that it's solved. It's there. And this year has been the warmest year from ever, when we started to take measures. So we have to be prepared to, in some way, use this big change, what will be the effect of this big social experiment, to try to move in a direction that improve the quality of the model of life and the economical model, and also, as we will see, in some way, the philosophical attitude that we have toward ourselves and nature. I will say not so much. I see this this perspective very difficult. There is something in the specificity of this crisis that is in some way paradoxical, because it's a social issue. Everybody is involved, but what socially is asked us is to be alone, to separate from the other, to physically separate from the others. And this creates much more higher difficulties to recompose the society and to do something together. But nevertheless, this is the game that we have to play, and we have to try to find some path that could be viable. And when I decide to title this conversation Discontinuity is because for sure there will be a discontinuity, and our role as a human being, as a citizen and as a designer in different way is how to reorient this discontinuity, to orient this discontinuity in a direction that could be the best possible in the given condition for today, for the transition phase, and for the future. So normally when we talk about what will happen, the first thing could be, let's look what happened today in the emergency and try to learn something from what we have the experience now. And in this way, we can shape the transition. And of course, the transition per se will shape what we can call the new normality. Because as I said before, it's a normality, will be a kind of normality, but we use this term, this adjective new, that is very generic, but simply says it's a normality that will not be the normality than before. So this is a trajectory, looking to the present, learning some lessons from what we are experiences, shaping the transition, and shaping the transition, trying to build the condition that will be the new normality. But for several reasons, especially us as designers, we can have also another way, that is, if in the moment of this kind of big experiment that we are participating, which we are part, it's not clear where we want to go. So transition, given that it's to go from A to B, we know what is A, but we have in some way to have an idea of B. So we have to generate some vision, some scenario about what could be the normality that we like, or what could be the normality that we think that could be the best possible, and afterward to shape our actions in the transition in the way that can bring us toward this normality, this new normality. And also when we act now in the emergency, in some way to keep in account where we want to go. So there are this, is not the one, if you are the one, you don't have the other one, are two different strategies to build up our mind of what could be done, that is at the same time having some idea, trying to shape our action today in the transition on the basis of these ideas, and learning what is happening today with this emergency, and to see how we can find some driver for change that we can use. So as a matter of fact, I already said, we have to create some vision to try to shape the transition in this way. And at the same time, we have to recognize today what are the drivers of change that are changing the system in which we are without a clear idea where it will bring this transformation. But for sure, there is something that happens. So I can anticipate what is the core of my story. So if at a certain point I have to finish, at least you know. I think that there are a lot of different elements that can be considered, but the core of what we should try to realize is to support and promote what here I call the vision of the resilient communities. So for some reasons that I will try to explain in a while, we have to be agent in the rebuilding of communities. The communities that we talk about are not the traditional one, and for sure they have to be resilient. Resilient means capable to face and to learn from the experience where some shock happens, where something terrible could happen. And unfortunately, we know that our society have to be prepared to other kind of problems, if not catastrophes. And this is why one of the core characteristics of every society of the future that we can imagine is to have this characteristic that is summarized in the expression resilience. And for what regards myself, and this is what I propose, maybe it's not the only way to talk about this story, this image of what, this vision of what could be a resilient society comes from 15 years of experience in what internationally is called the social innovation. More precisely should be the transformative social innovation. And the transformative social innovation, for some reason, given that it started in the old normality to try to find a solution and way of doing and way of being and way of thinking, they were in opposition to what was the mainstream at the moment. They also offer us some opportunity, some starting point, some raw material on which we can work to build the new vision and to build a new possibility for the future and these new resilient communities. At the same time, probably there is something that has to be added to what has been the experience of the previous 15 years. That is exactly, again, the issue about the climate emergency, that the fact that we are not now talking so much is there, and is there dramatically. So whatever we think, what we imagine, the vision of the future can, in my view, work on what we have learned in the past 15 years talking about social innovation, considering more than what we did before, the issue about the climate emergency that at the end of the day bring us back to the notion of resilience. So a few words on what we mean, what I mean when I say communities and resilient communities. I already anticipate communities that we talk about today are not the community of the past. I have not time now to explain, and I hope that you will capture the meaning. So we still use the term communities, but it is a little bit slippery because the community normally is associated to all the centuries ago villages, neighborhoods, where there was community very strong of people who were living there for all their life. They were always the same. They were inside very traditional and stable way of doing. And these are not the communities that we talk today. The communities that are emerging from the social innovation are light and open, are community by choice, are more social networks that create links in between the people. And at the same time, what is very important, the new community, as I said before, is mandatory that they are not only a kind of virtual community of people spread wherever in the digital space, but they have to be related to a place. This is something that we progressively learned better and better working on social innovation. So this, the importance of the place in which the community are. So the community are a group of people that have a conversation and several conversations, and some of this conversation has to be related to the environment in which their body exists. This means that it's a conversation in between people that are physically nearby. So there is an issue about proximity that permit them not only to have a conversation in the digital space, but also to meet in the physical one and to interact with the physical one. Why this issue about place is so important? For me, there are two main chapters that should be discussed. We need a society capable of care. One of the problems of the previous society, or the society still alive, is somebody defined it a careless society. So a society that is less and less capable to take care of people. And now with the disaster that we are living, everybody says that one of the motivations that is so difficult is that all the system of care in some way collapsed or is in difficulties. And by definition, care asks people to have interaction and conversation, but at a certain moment, you are also to be in face to the other. So the care is a care in between people that have to have the possibility physically to do something for the other. So if I needed some milk and I am sick, it's not enough to have a very big digital community spread worldwide, because nobody can bring me the milk. To have the milk, I need to have a community, a digital community that can be in some way help me, bringing me the milk or driving me to the hospital if I need it. So all the story about care and what does it mean care today is very related to the idea of community and the community in place. And I would like to add that also the notion of care is very related to the notion of care for the environment. It's related to how a community is embedded in a place, if you want, how a community know the place in where they are. And when you put these two things together, you have a community in place. So a community that is capable to know about the place where they are, that take care of themselves, take care of the place, and at the same time take care of the overall environment. And there has been a discussion that I'm not going to do now, but it's a very important discussion if we had to go in depth. That is the community, the care is the care for the humans. And this is very important, of course, for us. But the more and more we see the importance also taking care of the non-human. And so there is all the discussion of what does it mean, community and care, when we are more than human assemblies. So we consider not only the human being, but also all the other entities that all together constitute nature in some way. So this is a little bit the story of the community in place that we should try to build. Now the issue is, if we look to the present phase, and if we look what is happening in this tragic emergency, the issue is the crisis is creating, making, has made tangible some element that could be drivers of change and that could be used if we are capable to bring the system toward the direction of the vision that I said before. This is the question. So I don't know, but I can shortly pass through three main drivers, what for me are three main drivers that are very important for all of us. The first one is that a crisis like this one shows that the idea that everything can be solved by the market cannot work. And this is not an ideological observation, it's not a discussion in between a different school in economics. It's something physical and visible. In the moment in which you have a very dramatic condition, all the story that the market could solve everything, that for me was not true also before, to be sincere, but now it's not only the opinion of Ezio Manzini or somebody much more important than me, it's something that everybody recognized, also the one that was the most interested to promote the marketization of our society, ask to what, ask to who, ask to two main elements that are element of the different kind of economy, the role of the state. So everything, everywhere, also in America, in the US in this moment, the role of the state is evident. So you cannot avoid now to talk about the market and the state. But it's also very important, and very important by my point of view, to consider the situations that are working well, better, are the ones in which you have some communities, which there are some commons. Therefore, the rediscussion about the economical model has to keep in account that there could still be the market, of course, but there should be also the role of the state, and there should be also, more and more importantly, the role of the economy of the commons, of the communities, of the gift economy, etc. Therefore, this is not a specific issue for designer, but as designer, we have to know in which kind of economical system are we working and we are dealing with. The second point is even more important, also if maybe it's less evident than the previous one, is that at least the Western culture, at least the mainstream Western culture has been mainly anthropocentric. So thinking that the reality was a kind of machine, the human being was at the center, and they could have all the possibility to drive this machine, the overall world, to use whatever they want, to dispose whatever they want, wherever, because we can fix it. So the idea that still now we don't know how to manage with this very, very little creature that are the virus show in an extremely clear way that we cannot control what we traditionally call nature. And that there is something that is not a machine. So there is no one that have the is broken. So all the story about who are we and how we interact with the world, the nature, is totally challenging. You could ask why to talk about nature. I put this image that, by the way, is the airport of Hong Kong empty. For who has been there, the airport of Hong Kong is one of the most busy places in the planet. And here you see the empty Hong Kong airport. In my view, is to make clear that when we say, as I think, that we are recognizing that nature is very complex and that we are part of nature. Nature is not only the forest of the Amazon. Nature is also what happened in Hong Kong or in the airport in New York or in Boston or in the city in the middle of Singapore. So nature is everywhere and has the possibility to do something unimaginable, because the possibility of closing an airport like this one was totally unimaginable, as it was unimaginable that China should stop, that New York should be closed, that Milano is also closed, etc., etc. So it shows us what is the power of nature, and therefore it asks us to be much more modest. Afterward, there are several different metaphors of defining who are we and what are we human beings in relation to nature, but for sure, the idea that we are the owner or the master of nature has collapsed, and we have to find a new metaphor. Personally, I embrace the idea that all the Earth is a big entity, living entity, and we are part of this living entity. And if this is true, we have to find a way to act that is not so much using the metaphor of war, as is said today. We have to make the war against the virus, but we have to use more metaphors that are related to medicine. We have to heal our organism. We have to take care of it. And this, in my view, is very important for a designer, because our culture started very much with this idea of being the center and having the possibility to design everything we want in the way that we want. And the third one that could appear at a different level, more modest, but is so important, is that this kind of, I call it a social invention, a social experiment, is also a kind of super intensive total immersion course for millions of people in using online services. It could appear very, very technical, very specific in relation to the previous two, but in reality it will have a huge impact into the reality. The same fact that we are talking now in this way could be one example, but in any case, I think that it's not so much only that people is staying more time online, but we are doing much more things online. So much more services. And so we had to overcome some difficulties, to overcome some psychological difficulties, to learn how to do it. So to take our time to do it. And but when we are doing it, when we do it, now that so many things are moving toward the online way of delivering some service or doing some activity, many people will discover that this online activity may be very convenient. And therefore, there are no reason to imagine that all this movement of the center of our activity from the physical world much more toward the digital one will come back totally as before. So we had to foresee that many of the what we discovered that was possible to do now online will remain also afterwards. Is this good or not? It depends. By many points of view, it could be good because, for instance, environmentally, it's good because we can reduce the unnecessary mobility. And also sometimes it's also very effective. I discover people that say it's very complicated, but something can be done in a very good way. At the same time, this idea of having this handy, simple way of doing things and doing alone in your home is very much in line with the two main streams of the transformation of the society in the last decades. As a name, they have individualization, virtualization, and control. And if nothing else happens, this tendency to use more services online, to move much more of our activity online, could be a kind of continuation of these trends that altogether, in my view, are very dangerous, more than dangerous. They create a kind of dystopic view of what could be a society of people more and more closed individually in their own home, having only this kind of virtual or quasi-only virtual interactions, and with a more and more detached relationship with the physical world and with the art, that is the virtualization, leaving traces everywhere that can be controlled by somebody else. So if we don't want to do something like this, something else has to happen. These are the drivers. So the issue is the driver, as the three ones that I have mentioned, are a mainstream that goes in a direction that in my view is not positive, but they could also have other opportunities. So the idea is how much we can use these drivers to steer the transition toward what I'm proposing as an objective, that are the resilient communities. And I would say these resilient communities have to be hybrid community, and I underline hybrid because probably more than in the past, now we have to consider that they live both in the physical and in the digital space. And I can make some example, and afterward I will try to close because I see that I'm speaking already 20 minutes. And I can give you very shortly, just to give the flavor, some example that emerged from some meeting that maybe you, my part, I also founded this years ago, and online, it's not online only, international network on design for social innovation, and we have had 2 meetings in the past week, in this week. One with the eastern part, our Desislab in East Asia, and one on the western part. There was Europe, India, South America, and North America. And it's really interesting, and I have not time now to talk. It appeared that many schools, practically all the schools, started to do something. And they started to do something in many different ways. The most obvious, many of them use the Fab Lab, or they workshop, textile workshop, or fashion workshop to produce medical devices, to produce masks, to produce disposable waste. So there's been a first reaction immediately, producing something, using the capability that they have to support the delivery of some product that could be helpful in the moment of emergency. But this is, for me, is quite obvious. It's very important, quite obvious. More interesting is, for the sake of our discussion, to see how they faced the transformation and the transition phase. And here we have 2 kinds of attitude that I cannot generalize, but one is more on the East and one is more on the West. One is to look to the emergency, and from the emergency to try to imagine something that could happen in the transition. And the other one is more to look at something that we will like, that is the new normality, and to see how this can influence the new transition. So in the first line, for instance, the most, it's quite obvious, but it's very nice. This is, I will not mention everything, so you can read the university where it has been done, etc. Everywhere in China, in Italy, many places, people try to break the way of being totally alone in the closed in their home, using the balcony as a way to express themselves with the others. So there have been some students that decided to work on this idea to create a kind of device that could help this kind of meetup in the balcony, and to give some opportunity to be useful not only in the emergency phase, but also in the transition phase. So this is super, super simple, but it has already some elements that are important for us. So there is a digital network that creates some digital virtual networking, but between people that lives nearby, that lives in the buildings that are in the same courtyard, for instance. So there is this double link in between being digital and being separated physically, at least at the moment, but at the same time between people that live nearby and can exchange also physical. And another one that is interesting, and there are many projects like this. This was working on the restaurant. So the small restaurant had a crisis for the client, etc. You can imagine. And therefore, they imagine that in the moment they are being open, they are open, but people have still to maintain this distance. So how to maintain this distance, how you can know in which restaurant you can find the right number of people. So they designed this kind of application that permits you to know where you are, which are the restaurant nearby, and having for each restaurant the number of people, so if they are crowded or not, and what has been the history by the point of view of if there have been the virus or not in this restaurant, and so on and so forth. So also this one is something that tried to use a digital device to create some link with a physical place where people can physically go, knowing that in this moment, for some months at least, we will maintain the physical distance. And the second thread is the one that starts from something that has been already researched, and to see what does it mean. So many in Europe, in America, in South America, have worked on some project that was ongoing on the design for social innovation, and to see how to update and upgrade what they are doing, considering the new condition. And so, for instance, I took only two examples. This is Milano. There was a work in the neighborhoods, this is called Nolo, to regenerate it in the way that you can imagine, organizing a different kind of activity on the side of social, cultural, and productive activity. And now they are trying to imagine how this network of people that are existing, and then now they are separated, by how they could continue the relationship in this moment of emergency and the lockdown, but also in the transition, using also the transition as a moment to continue the kind of work that they were doing. And the other one is in Barcelona. In Barcelona, there is a very important project that is called the Superillas, that stands for Super Block. That is an idea to reorganize the city in a much more sustainable way, both socially and environmentally. And the school, that is Elisava, is working to create scenarios of how the life could be more sustainable socially and environmentally. So I'm working in this, so I say we because I'm working in this moment also with Elisava in Barcelona. We work how to use whatever we have developed until now in this scenario of Superillas, Super Block, and to see what can happen. What is interesting in this case is, and I want to say this, and this will be my last concept, is that Barcelona is a dense city. It's not dense as New York, so it's not dense vertically, but it's, we call it horizontally dense. In any case, it's one of the dense cities in Europe, as many others. So there are some idea, and the issue, our discussion is how this density can generate resilience, social resilience and physical resilience in terms of services and also environmental services. And the issue is that we have work on resilience, so we are working on the long run of how to create more resilient Superillas. that ask for redundancy, ask for multifunctionality. This is typical when you talk about resilience, but we have also to talk about density. And you can imagine this moment, this could appear a little bit contradictory because in the moment like this is an image of one of the most crowded, normally most crowded road in La Rambla in Barcelona, totally empty. So, and somebody say, okay, with the new idea of the virus, what happened is that we should have a more detached people. Well, we think that for the long run, we need the density in any case. So we are trying to imagine what does it mean, density in the age of social distancing. And therefore we go back to my point, that is, what does it mean to create support, localized one, and how we create distancing when it's needed, but also proximity when it's needed for other reasons. Is it possible? Yes, we have some, here I come back to one of the Chinese projects. I don't explain, but you can imagine this is a neighborhood that could be similar to the one in Barcelona, and this neighborhood, there is the possibility to know what is happening in the different places that could be interesting for a person at 15 minutes of walk from where they are. So reducing transportation and knowing what are the problems, how many people there are, if it's crowded or not. And so this is a kind of expression of what is a hybrid community of place. And if we imagine to combine some quality that comes from organizing people coming from the tradition of, for instance, as it is in Barcelona, with the idea that can, for instance, as this one that are in Beijing, we can have maybe a resilient community that is a kind of hybrid community of place. And I think, as I said before at the beginning, that this could be the main design direction in this post-pandemic phase. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Ezio, for this very compelling and timely provocation, I would say, because as you said, it's just maybe a way to open a conversation around the rural design in this transition towards a new scenario, new normality, as you call it. Actually, we got a lot of very, very interesting questions in the chat. So without further ado, I would like really to give the voice to everyone that asked questions. Trying to mix digital and non-digital better to give more a sense of the presence of people. I would like to ask the authors of these questions to talk about them, and I don't want to read all of them. So if I will mention them, and if they are still connected, I will be happy, for have a personal interpretation of the question. So Michael Mages, the first one. Michael, are you there? He's a colleague from Northeastern University. So, are you connected, Michael?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, very well,
okay.
Perfectly.
Sorry, I got a warning that I could not unmute myself. So,
no, yeah, that's not planned, but I love to have to hear other voices.
No worries. I was thinking, and Ezio, you've talked before on how government at the democratic government at the national level supports these local innovations. But we also see, like in Hungary and the US, we see, and other places, we see leaders using this as an opportunity to deconsolidate democracy and remove some of the protections for that support that act as the substrate that support these resilient communities. What structures, in this kind of difficult time, like what kind of structures, what kind of supports could you see introducing into the national dialogues to help temper that or avoid that?
Well, thank you for the question. Maybe I should underline one point that I did not do so clearly. I normally say that there are different ways of making politics. So I see what you say, and I am concerned as you. And I know very well, and I also read the book of Naomi Klein, for instance. She explained very well how the ones that have the power in a certain moment are the capability to use for their own advantage of all the disasters. So I'm very convinced that it's like this. So well, this is another discussion, but in any case, I think that you are in a very dangerous moment. Given that, what we can do, we can operate at different levels. So as a human being, as a citizen, I can strike, I can vote, I can participate to a party. And this for sure has to happen. It's a part of our activity as a human being. But at the same time, as a human being, as a designer, there is what I call the politics of every day. And the politics of every day are not the one that directly can fight against who are taking such a bad position. Also in Italy, we have unfortunately many, but we can show that there is also something else that can be done. We can give ideas and give example and practical example that there are other directions that can be thrown. And in my view, this is extremely important because one of the motivation, in my view, that make, let's say, the bad guy so powerful is also that it's not so clear if there are an alternative. So the neoliberal story of 20 years ago, when they say there is no alternative, there is only one possibility, now is challenged because we see that that possibility, the typical neoliberal one, do not work. And it appears a kind of story about America first, Italy first, everything first against the other. And this is simple. It's not good ethically, but probably also will not work at all. But it gives to people a certain idea of what could be. The other ones, as us, has had more difficulty until now. So as somebody, maybe also you and others that have worked for 10 years or 15 years now on social innovation, my regret is that we did a lot. Not we, a lot of things happened, but not strong enough to generate a vision that is sufficiently credible. So to say there is some alternative and there is some real alternative. And the way to build this, I say scenario before, is the scenario of the possibility of creating, for instance, a community that have the characteristics we said, creating a system of care that is also based on the fact that people take care each other. The idea that it's possible to consider nature in a different way. So when I name the three different, for me, main issue that has been challenged by the crisis, and we have now in this uncertain moment some possibilities, so we should be capable to propose and to show that there are way of considering entrepreneurship that is not based only on one economy, the one of the market, but more complex ecology of economies. And we can say that there are possibilities to have a different approach in the relationship between human being and nature. And we can say and show that there is a possibility to have a different mix in between our life online and our life offline in the real world. So this is what we can do, making our choice as human being in our daily life, and also as designer promoting and supporting these ideas through making something happen. So to make something happen is not the solution. We need also political action at a different level. But if we do not create food for thinking, for proposal, material that permit to build a new scenario, it's also difficult to make the politics, because at the moment also the one that could have a good intention at a very high political level are not very convincing, because probably the story that they had to tell is not convincing enough. So we can contribute voting for the right one, making strike when it's needed, but also behaving in a certain way, and also as designer promoting some kind of activities.
Thank you, Ezio and Michael, for the question. There is a second question. It's from Dietmar of Uber. Are you connected? Yeah, Dietmar, yeah.
Can you unmute me? Oh, yeah. Okay, now I'm here.
Yeah, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. I saw that my question came also up in different versions by other people, but I'm curious about your opinion about the negative aspects of community and community-focused efforts of exclusion of outsiders, and the attacks to Asian Americans in the US, where you quickly sometimes also see this kind of disconnect between group interests and societal interests, and how you see this tension between a kind of a community mindedness versus a more abstract civic mindedness that would also include people that I don't necessarily share much with, and how that what are the consequences for design in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, this is I can advertise my book, and there is one chapter that is dedicated to try to express what I think, but also what I've seen in my work in social innovation, and also discuss if we have to call it communities or not. At the end, I choose to use community also if we could have the question that you are saying now. So there could be a way, considering community, that is not only conservative, but also very negative, because are the community that could also be not the traditional one, could be new one, that put people together in a kind of we against the others. So you choose to enter in a group to find a kind of identity that should distinguish yourself from the others. Therefore, the new community have to be characterized by some adjective. One of them is that they have to be community by choice, but also some identitarian community are by choice. So this is not enough. The by choice distinguish the community that we talk today, included the one that we don't like, in relation to the community of the past century that was not by choice. You was really simply living in the community as a fish in the water without having consciousness so much, having the possibility to choose. So the first adjective is they are by choice. The second one is that they have to be open. And this is what is really challenging, because what does it mean to say that it's a community, but it's open? Open means that it is not based on the we against you. It's much more to be seen, what I try to explain in my book, as a mesh of networks that overlap, and you have a kind of density of people that in a certain place are all of them dealing with different people for different motivation, but also they overlap in a place, and they have something to do with that place. And therefore, this should not avoid totally the risk of creating discriminations, but avoid the risk to having a clear border and say, we against you. I mean, I don't know if I can make an example, but I live in the countryside, in the village where we are. It's a contemporary village, so it's not a closed community, it's a very open one. And if you have this community, you have the one that are, I don't know, for the football. So in the football, they are interested to the football. And in the football, you have everybody that's interested to the football, included the migrants that are very good in football. And afterward, you have another community that play music. And so they have many people, and now the migrants arrive. There are some migrants that are very good in some instrument, and they have been integrated. So the community afterward is summing up of the group that is working on sport, the one that is working on music, the one that play organize the festivals, the one that met on the bar simply playing cards, and all these are relatively open. So I can be part of that community, even though half of my life it was, not now because I don't travel anymore, but when I traveled, I was away. So this kind of very open community, and this is fundamental to be understood, because in the past, when we started to talk about community, we had only Margaret Thatcher that say there is no society, only individual. So what's enough to say that community is when the individual goes together. So it was relatively simple to say what we wanted. We don't wanted the Margaret Thatcher idea of a society only done by individual. Unfortunately, now it's much more complicated because we still have the neoliberal that are only individual, only consumer on one side and still very strong. And afterward, you are the ones that are disappointed by this story that are proposing, let's go back to our religion, let's go back to our country, let's go back to our nations. And therefore, our path is in the middle. So if we are not very attentive, if we are too open, you arrive to the neoliberal Thatcher's society. If you are too closed, you risk to go toward the identitarian community. How you do it is a kind of equilibrium. Well, it's not easy, but if I use always social innovation, it's not because I have something special, but because if you look something that happened, it's like this. So you can find situation in which you have group of people that are very open, they put together, they do something together, they have some objective, and therefore they tell us that it's difficult, but it's impossible. And the last point in the description of the community is that to exist, they need to have a supporting platform, an enabling system. And therefore, this has to be designed. So nobody can design the community in general, but you can and must design. So if you don't have an enabling platform, this community will not exist. So there is a lot to be designed. It's not said that it has to be designed by designers as us, professional designer, could be designed by normal people that use the capability to create the conditions. And if you look, if I take the example, also the very simple that I did, every one of these different networks that I mentioned before in my village have at least a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group, or someone has also a website. So they exist today because they are based on something that has been designed. And this is more and more valuable if you move to something more complex than this.
Thank you, Ezio and Dietmar, for the question. Next question is from David Tamish. Of course, it's not, you're not obliged to speak for, I can read the question. So if you don't show up, I will just read it. David, do you want to read it, or I go on if you're still connected? Okay, I go on with the question. So transforming our metaphors can transform society. Can you say more about the connection between design and conceptual metaphor theory?
Sorry. The conceptual metaphor theory, I'm not sure that I know exactly what you mean. I know what is the notion of generative metaphor, and I don't know if it is the same. Paolo, you were saying something?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if David, are you here? Can you clarify that?
I'm here. I'm here.
Good. Go on. So.
Well, basically, I guess conceptual metaphor theory was put forth by George Lakoff and several other cognitive linguists in the 1980s, basically saying that our understanding of the world, our understanding of reality is basically shaped by metaphors.
Yes.
Everything is metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, okay. So I was not. I imagined that maybe it was something more precise or more, I don't know, something else. But I agree. I agree because I think everybody agree that we can also interpret all our conversation as using metaphors, and our decisions are taken inside metaphors. And this is why, in my view, I used when I choose these, I call it a driver of change. One of the three was exactly a change in the metaphor in something so basic as the relationship in between the human being and what we have called in nature until now. And even though I know quite well, as everybody of you, what has been the original metaphor of the progress and the infinite consumption of material and the possibility to use our earth as a kind of unlimited place for resources and that we can use. And afterward, at a certain point, considering the limit of the planet, somebody came up with a metaphor of the spaceship Earth. And so this was, okay, we had to consider that this, our Earth is limited, so we have to manage it as it was a spaceship. But also this one was a step forward because it was a metaphor considering the limit of the Earth, but still considering the fact that the reality that we call the Earth or nature or the planet is possible to consider as a kind of machine. I use machine to say something that can be understood totally, could be fixed if it's broken, it could be upgraded if we like, and the direction of the evolution can be changed. Now we are discovering the complexity. No, we have already discovered several decades ago. Some of us discovered complexity. We Western, because the Eastern I've always known that the world is complex. Well, let's say we Western people discovered complexity, and now it appears so clearly. And it appears so clearly because we see, for instance, that nobody understands what is happening. Nobody has the control. And so I listen around, and I went behind all the metaphor of the war is an idea that there is an enemy. So the enemy is a living entity, so that we cannot control because it's the enemy, and we have to fight against it. And so this is, at least it considers the nature is an entity, is a living entity, and therefore a very complex entity, but it maintains the separation in between us and this nature that at a certain point react with a power that is capable to do something that nobody else has done. For instance, to close all the cities and all the half of the society in the planet inside their own home. And afterward, there is another metaphor that is the one that could be told in different ways. That could be the Gaia theory. And I don't use the Gaia theory for some reason that now is too complicated to explain, but I agree on the idea that we had to consider that the planet is kind of, the Earth is a living entity, very big and very complex, and we are part of this living entity. So we have to see ourselves in this moment as elements of a complex system, that in this moment we are, the system is sick. So what we are seeing is sickness of the system. But when we move from this crisis today, in which we see the sickness of this entity in the virus, and we move toward considering the environmental and climate change and the ecological crisis, we are the virus. So in some way, the human beings are the virus that have creating so many problems to the overall system. And if we adopt this idea of being a part of an entity that is living, and we are part of this living system, we have this big metaphor, generate sub-metaphors that are about not production, but generation and regeneration, not war, but healing and caring. And if you want, to conclude, it's a very long story, but the central role of the idea of care, and also in my presentation, I used this notion of care, discussing about what does it mean care, and why to care we need also to consider our physical body and the physical environment. Well, the answer has been very long, and I don't know if it was the right answer to your question, but in any case, it's one part of the story. For who is interested, when I say we, I mean the Desis Network. One of the activities that we do is also called Philosophy Talk, and the Philosophy Talks have in time have had a different subject, and the one that we started just before the crisis in Milano was a thread that is called Design and the Politics of Nature, and with Virginia Tassinari, that is the person that is in some way the heart and the main engine of this philosophy talk. We have started, and we had also a program that now, of course, is in discussion because all the places where we had to do it has been deleted. So we have, as everybody, redesign it. But for sure, we will continue. So if you are interested in a more philosophical discussion on this topic, well, we try to do our best in this thread that is called Design and the Philosophy of Nature.
Thank you. I would like to move on with other questions. And Andrea Taverna, are you here connected? Or if not, just, or if you don't want to speak, just be silent and I will read the question.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, we do. A little bit louder, please.
Okay. So my two questions, one is rather a provocation, are the fact that I agree with the fact that there will be a new normality at the start of this speech. You say that discontinuity will be something for sure. But in the previous week, I started to be a bit skeptical about the entity of this transition and felt that there is a risk that we give for granted that something will change and how much will change. So I was wondering, shouldn't we as a designer not only focus on what could be designed this new normality, but also to make sure that this transition will happen and how? And the provocation is rather about the term resilient linked to community and to the use of a new normality. Since if resilience is something that has the property to going back to the initial condition, I see a contrast with the fact that new normality imply a change. Hence, I was wondering if there aren't other new terms such as the one suggested by Taleb, which is anti-fragility, as something that increase capacity and capabilities after a shock rather than going back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for this question. It's very pertinent. This issue of using the term resilience or use the term anti-fragility, that I know. So I read the book and I had several discussions on this. At the end of the day, I choose resilience to maintain resilience. And why? First of all, we can in some way redefine, when we talk about resilience of a system that include a human being, by definition, the human being has at least potentially the possibility to learn. Therefore, the resilience to systems that are including human being are systems that can resist and in some way react to some shock, and at the same time to learn and to be more prepared to what can happen. You could say this is very near to the definition of anti-fragility and anti-fragile, and it is. So why I prefer to maintain resilient than anti-fragile? Because I think that if I use the resilience, it could create some discussion, as you said, but it's a good term, it's very well known, and we have to protect and eventually to update or upgrade it. Where if you use the term anti-fragile, you say something that you have to explain what it is, and it takes you all the lecture to explain what is the notion of anti-fragile. So I am a little bit for the idea that when there are good terms, you should try to use them. And if you are an intellectual, if you have some power in a discussion, to use your capability to upgrade the terms and to make them coherent with the need. For instance, I had exactly the same issue, the same problem with the term sustainability. At a certain point, somebody started to say, no, but sustainability is not good, everybody's using it, now it's losing its meaning. Yes, I know, but my responsibility, my small responsibility, I do not pretend to be capable to change the way in which people perceive it, but in the limit that I can, I try to give to sustainability, that is a very good term that is finally entered in the discussion, exactly because it's entered for so many different people. We have to protect it and not to throw it away because given its success, people use it in the wrong way. So I don't know if you could agree that these two could be in parallel, because each one of the two stories is not the same. But this is my answer. So I prefer to use resilience in the sense that I try to explain, that is very near to the notion of anti-fragile, and but for the reason that I say I prefer. And going to the transition, the first of your question, a new normality. We now I can say we, because this has been a discussion done also with my friends and colleagues. We discuss a lot if we had to call it a new normality or not. But at the end, if we have a moment of emergency, people imagine that there will be something that is more normal. And we have to accept that everybody, including myself, at a certain point, I want to have something normal. Something normal means that I will not be so much stressed. So I think that we should redefine also the term normal. At the moment, we put it near new, that is a very generic adjective, simply say, is not exactly the same as before. But the normality has to be seen as a right of people, not to be always in the maximum of stress. For instance, I think that when we work on social innovation, there are different phases in the trajectory of innovation, also in the social innovation. And at a certain point, the best that you can do, also as a designer, you can contribute, is to create, also in that case, a kind of new normality. That means that something that at the beginning could have been done only by some super activist, a kind of guerrilla people that devote all their own life, all their own energy, take some risk to make something happen. At a certain point, if things go well, if the idea is accepted, if it's recognized, etc., at least locally, it has to be normalized. So I think we are not to be too much preoccupied to say the community garden in New York now have been normalized. And they are normalized because you don't need to be a guerrilla gardener and have your fight against the police because you are squatting a place that you are not allowed to, etc., as it was 30 years ago. Luckily, things moved, and the community gardens, I take this very simple example, but I could name many others, are quite normal. So a family can go to the community garden to be safe and to do, if they like gardening, make the gardening. Nevertheless, it's a normality that is disruptive in some way, because and still now the idea that the city can also be done by communities that have a sense of ownership and they create some common goods is not the normal way of considering how the city are built. And therefore, I think that to create island of normality that is abnormal in relation to the mainstream is what we should do, because at that point, it consolidates, it can last in time. It's not only related to the super activism that somebody could have. And I think that designer in generating this new normalities could play a very important role. In some way, is not only the only one. We can also play a role in the design activism in the first phases. But I think that we can play a role also in consolidating, in working with institutions, in making something more acceptable in the daily life of people. And more
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. We are kind of running out of time. So I will ask to have, there's another question from a student of our program. Stefania, do you want to go on with your question?
Hi, Ezio. Thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, and I think it's related to some other questions, but I was wondering, how do you think this new online community changes the sense of place?
The sense of waste.
Place.
Place.
Place. Yes. No, the short is that also the place become hybrid, so they live both in the physical and in the virtual space, and afterward the balance in between the two can be quite diverse. I give you some example. So in Italy, but it's something that probably is happening in many different places. We have a very successful transformative social innovation that is called social streets. And the social street mainly starts from a real street that is there, and people do not know each other. So they establish some very simple digital platform to start a conversation, to put people together, to have a kind of extended meetup. And at the end, you have a physical place that was abandoned because there was a street in which there was no real life. It was only to move from A to B, but there was no real life anymore because the community did not recognize the street as their own environment. And this place is again alive. So, and it can be again alive because there is this digital platform, because without a digital platform, these people could not have the possibility to meet, to organize, to say what to do, what, when, and how to create the opportunity to meet. So in this case, there is a physical place that progressively is created and maintained alive, thanks to also the help that the digital platform can give. In my presentation, if you want, it was the second of the two streams, the one that was moving from the neighborhood in Milano or the neighborhood in Barcelona, but I know a similar example in many places, in New York, in Brazil, in many places. So people working on a physical place with people that are living already in the same place, and they use, in any case, some digital device that become fundamental to have the possibility to go on. So that place, we can say, exists because there are some digital devices. It's different if you have some digital platform that could be launched, and afterward having the capability to create a group of people living nearby and in some way creating a place, starting from the digital platform. For instance, it's an American platform that arrived also in Italy, so probably you know better than me, that it's called Nextdoor. And Nextdoor do exactly the same. So the idea is similar to the social street, but the social street move from a group of people that have their own digital tool. And the other one is a kind of global platform that pretend to land in different places and create conditions for people to organize themselves and to meet. So hopefully these two trajectories can converge. Personally, maybe for my age or maybe for my culture, I'm much more related to the first one. So my story as designer has been related to try to organize physical people, and lately more and more using digital devices to make this organization possible. But it's possible also that the other trajectory can happen. And in any case, at the end, the capability, our capability should be to find a balance in between the two. And also today, in these days, that so many people went online, we see also new tools that can be used, that can be very interesting. So that this kind of, the places become a kind of augmented reality, if you want. And we have to develop capability to have augmented reality that not only are environmentally acceptable, socially acceptable, but also offer beautiful experiences, joyful and beautiful experiences. And I think that there is so much to do. So it's a whole prairie of activity that is open in front to the designers. So for sure, if we are capable to recognize where we are, we will not be bored in the next future.
Thank you, Ezio. Thank you, Stefania. With this image of the prairie that opens for, is open for designers to be, not conquered, probably sounds too much, centered on design, but I think that's a very positive image.
Is the fact that it's open for designers do not mean that we do everything and we do correct. It's only there is a lot of things to do, and if everybody can play their own role, also the designer, especially given that there are some cultural, it's not only a technical issue, but there are some social and some political and some cultural issues. So there are something that is really related also to what could be our contribution. But very far from me to say that we are the one that will in some way solve the problem.
Good. So the time is over. I'm sorry for we got other questions in our chat, and I'm sure probably other people would have wanted to address you some questions, but we can. I will try to share through the channels of the Center for Design also some connections with Ezio's work at Desis, all the meetings he was mentioning and the talks he was mentioning. So keep an eye to the social media account and the website of the Center for Design for an update. I mean, we will increase, I hope, our partnership with the Desis Network for the future with the Center for Design. So I will try to share as much as possible information about how to be in contact with Ezio and the work of Desis Network. I would like to thank you all, the participants, the attendant to this lecture, and Ezio, of course. Finally, we did it, and that's despite all the adversity we made it. That's really important. I really wanted to have your voice in our community. So thank you very much. I just want to close mentioning one initiative we are working on that is trying to address some of the questions that Ezio proposed today through the lens of design. So it's a project that started really very, in a kind of a very naive way, but now it's really growing, and it's really participate, and we have now different countries involved. And so if you want to join in this very open platform to try to imagine together what the future and the new scenario could be through design, we are very open to any collaboration. We are constantly seeking for partners and support for this project. So thank you once again. We are working on this on the third lecture that will probably be around the topic of design and AI to address some of the new issues that we may face if these devices, these technologies will become part of the new scenario. So some problems will emerge, some issues that we didn't know before. We have been Zoom bombed right in the middle of this talk. So new issues, new problems like the privacy concern that Ezio was talking about at the beginning are emerging also. So we will go into we will move into some uncharted territories, mostly for the technology side, especially is, some new problems will emerge. So thank you very much again. Thank you, Ezio. Thank you all the staff of the marketing from Candy, the college, for helping setting this up, and thank you for everyone that take the time to attend this event. Let's be in contact for the next one. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Ciao.
Ciao, Ezio.